Welcome everyone to the first hearing of the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee for the 118th Congress, and this is my first hearing chairing this committee. And I want to thank my colleague who will be with us shortly, Senator Kramer, for his partnership and assistance leading up to this hearing, and I look forward to our future work together. And I also want to thank Senator Kramer's staff. I think they're here, and the EPW committee staff for their assistance in making today's hearing a reality. And I had the opportunity to say this to each of them right before the hearing gavelled in, but I also want to again say thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today and taking part in this important discussion. The topic of today's hearing is an important one: understanding how the Army Corps of Engineers has been successful at responding to emerging water management challenges like drought risks in the western United States or increased flooding in the Midwest, and how the Corps can be a better partner in responding to these challenges. For Arizona, the most prominent challenge that we face today, and one I talk about on this committee all the time, is drought. Arizona and the entire western United States is in the midst of a 2-decade-long drought. And this has put incredible strain on watersheds throughout the West. In Arizona, this strain is seen most prominently along the Colorado River. But it's by no means the only impacted watershed. Now, we had an unseasonably wet winter this year, and we got great snowpack in the Rockies. And this means we've got better than usual runoff, and all that's good news. I mean, it really is. But we know from experience that wet winters are often followed by dry winters the next year. So we need to continue to prepare for this. And Congress has already acted to take emergency actions to respond to the drought in the West. I secured $4 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act for the Bureau of Reclamation to respond to drought conditions along the Colorado River. And already, the Bureau of Reclamation has used that funding to conserve nearly 500,000 acre-feet of water on the Colorado River through some short-term water reduction agreements. And I will also note that the Gila River Indian community and Governor Lewis stepped up here and made one of the most significant contributions in this process, agreeing to leave 125,000 acre-feet of water in Lake Mead. And this helps us stop the bleeding. But we know that more is needed. The name of the game here in the western United States is long-term system conservation and efficiencies. Those efficiencies will limit water loss and promote better conservation. The Bureau of Reclamation is making some investments to support these projects, but this must be a whole government effort. That includes the Army Corps of Engineers. And that's why I worked hard in last year's WRDA to secure key provisions to help address these water supply challenges. And this included a number of things, like providing new authorities to the Army Corps to respond to drought risk, to reauthorizing the Tribal Partnership Program for 10 years. It also included requiring the Corps to study ways to better support managed aquifer recharge efforts and examining how installing natural features at federal reservoirs can improve storage capacity. And I want to give Senator Kramer some credit for his work to establish a Western Water Cooperative Committee in WRDA, which is going to foster more collaboration between states when addressing supply challenges in the western United States. And I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses today about how these programs and provisions are being implemented. And I also hope that we can explore what more needs to be done. For example, do the flood control curves established by the Army Corps, which govern how much water can be retained in all federal reservoirs for drinking water or flood control, does it make sense given the changing hydrology in the western United States? Do those curves still make sense, or should we modify them? At a time when we don't have time or water we don't have either to waste, is the Corps able to move quickly enough to support needed infrastructure investments in the western United States? And what more can and should the Corps be doing to address invasive plant species in these rivers and in these watersheds? And so I look forward to discussing all of these questions and more with our witnesses today. I'm going to start with some introductions, and depending on the timing, we'll see where we go next, because I'd like to hear from Senator Kramer for his opening remarks and some further introductions. So let me first start with Governor Stephen Lewis. He's currently serving his third term as governor of the Gila River Indian Community, and previously as the community's lieutenant governor. Governor Lewis was born in Sacaton on the Gila River Indian Community. He graduated from Arizona State University, like my younger daughter Claire, and pursued graduate studies at the JFK School of Government at Harvard University. And during his tenure leading the community, Governor Lewis has developed a track record for bringing innovative solutions to water challenges on the community. He spearheaded the development of the community's managed aquifer recharge sites, of which I've visited multiple occasions. And he restored the community's riparian area. He's also been a key collaborative partner in the ongoing negotiations around Colorado River conservation issues. Governor Lewis has also spearheaded education initiatives, collaborations with the community's veteran population, and advocated for the protection of the Indian Child Welfare Act, both at home and nationally. Governor Lewis serves as secretary for the National Congress of American Indians. He's the president of ASU's American Indian Policy Institute, and he's on the executive board of the National Indian Gaming Association and is on the board of trustees for the Heard Museum in Phoenix. Leslie Myers. Leslie is the Associate General Manager and Chief Water Resources Executive for the Salt River Project. Ms. Myers joined SRP in 2022 and has more than 30 years of experience with water resources management in Arizona and the Southwest. Prior to joining SRP, Ms. Myers served as the area manager for the Phoenix area office with the Bureau of Reclamation. Ms. Myers received her BS in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M University, an Aggie, welcome, and is a registered professional engineer. Christy Plummer. Christy is the Chief Conservation Officer for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, or TRCP. Ms. Plummer joined TRCP in 2016, and before which she worked with Solar City, the Nature Conservancy, and the Conservation Fund on issues related to federal land and renewable energy policy. She worked for 7 years on Capitol Hill, working for former Senators John Chaffee and Bob Smith, and was staff director for Senator Lincoln Chaffee when he was the chair of the Fisheries, Wildlife, and Water Subcommittee on this committee. Ms. Plummer has a BA in Biology and Environmental Studies from the University of Pennsylvania and a MA in Environmental Studies from Brown University. So with that, let me turn it over to Senator Kramer. I said all these great things about you, but you weren't here. I want to turn it over to him for his opening statement and also to introduce our remaining two witnesses. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, for that and for the kind words you said earlier. I'm going to verify them later. But I like this committee a lot. I like this subcommittee a lot. I enjoyed my work on it previously, and as a ranking member with Senator Cardin, we accomplished some big things, and I look forward to even bigger things with Chairman Kelly, who's going to go do what I just did, and that's vote on the floor. And I'll try to read slowly. But thank you all of you witnesses for being here as well. This is, as I said, this is a good committee. The whole committee is a good committee. And this subcommittee especially, I think we've worked on some really important things together. And I look forward to many more of those. I think today's hearing is a good place to start with that. We're focused today on gathering feedback and information from stakeholders regarding new and existing authorities that enable the Corps of Engineers to respond to challenges related to drought, to floods and water supply. And isn't it amazing? All of those things happen at the same time in our great big country some years. Additionally, the hearing will provide an opportunity to discuss the Water Resources Development Act of 2022 and help inform future WRDA legislative action concerning water management issues. But before we turn to that, I want to make a few comments about the doctrine of cooperative federalism and the state's well-established rights regarding water management. Now, I happen to think that states' rights have been overlooked in lots of areas, not just water management, but it's probably as good a display of some of those, some of the imbalance that we should not see in cooperative federalism. Regarding the Western states, Congress and the courts have given clear and consistent deference to states for water allocation through the 1944 Flood Control Act and the Water Supply Act of 1958. History matters. Despite this, the Corps has pursued various regulatory actions over the years and the decades, namely their proposed water supply rule in 2016, threatening to erode Western states' authority to manage water resources within their boundaries, that is to say, the state's boundaries. Cognizant of this continued state and federal conflict over water management, Congress established the Western Water Cooperative Committee through the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. It was harder to do than I thought it would be. But the committee through this will provide a platform of dialogue for Western states to work out water appropriation and other issues with the Corps. And I'm hopeful this committee will help bring about a more cohesive state-federal partnership relating to water management. This committee can serve as a first step towards improving the existing partnership to better account for states' rights and better resemble the model of cooperative federalism envisioned by Congress. And I think one of the things about this committee that we're forming, it recognizes two important facts. One is that water belongs to each of us when it's in our state, but it belongs to all of us collectively. But it also recognizes that while not every state is the same, the halves of our country are very different. The West is different than the East. West Mississippi, West Missouri is different than East. So I'm anxious to see how well the committee works, and it's going to work as well as I guess the members of it apply themselves. In addition, I want to also take a moment and briefly touch on the Snake Creek embankment issue in my state. In 2007, the Corps realized they were experiencing some foundational problems with the embankment. The relief wells that they put in place were not properly maintained over the years. Instead of physically fixing the problem to prevent embankment failure, the Corps decided to implement a water control plan that would limit the pool differential between Lake Sakakawea and Lake Audubon, and only people from North Dakota would know what I'm saying when I do this. The state and others objected to this change as it would inhibit water supply to what's called the McCluskey Canal, among other concerns. I worked hard to secure a provision in WRDA 2020 requiring the Corps to reevaluate structural and operational alternatives to reduce risk of an embankment failure and properly account for the economic benefits provided by the embankment. And boy, aren't there economic benefits or economic consequences if there's adequate water or not adequate water. Water is pretty critical to economic opportunity. The Corps has since conducted a dam modification study and completed the associated draft environmental assessment earlier this year. The state and Garrison Diversion Conservancy District have raised concerns with the Corps recommend plan, primarily as it fails to fully account for the economic impacts associated with the entire embankment. And I look forward to getting into that a little bit today. I've since communicated with General Spellman and urged the Corps to take an all-encompassing perspective on the importance of the embankment, fully recognizing its integral role in ensuring water supply to roughly 50% of North Dakota's population and the billions of dollars worth of development that are on the line due to a need for consistent water supply. This issue is simply too important for the future of the state to get it wrong. So I look forward to speaking more with our witnesses and getting valuable feedback on a variety of water management issues, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I know you all bring tremendous expertise and certainly a lot of local and regional understanding of the importance of this issue. Okay, So now I get to introduce my witnesses. I call them my witnesses. Is it okay if I call them my witnesses? You're all of our witnesses, and you're all wonderful. But it's an important hearing, and it's my honor to introduce Dr. Andrea Travnicek, Director of the North Dakota Department of Water Resources, and Jennifer Verleger, Chair of the Western States Water Council, as witnesses. Thank you both for being here. Dr. Travnicek, we call her Trav. You all will eventually. It's easier to pronounce and spell, but it is Dr. Andrea Travnicek. She was appointed by Governor Burgum in 2021 to serve as the Director of the North Dakota Department of Water Resources. In this role, and it's important to focus on that because she's had lots of very important roles. She oversees the management of water resources for the state through water development, regulatory responsibilities, planning, education, and safety. Previously, Dr. Travnicek was the Director of the North Dakota Parks and Recreation Department and also worked in various roles at the United States Department of Interior, including serving in the Water and Science Hallway. She's intimately familiar with Western water issues and the impacts federal policy have on states. Further, Dr. Travnicek has a PhD in Natural Resource Management, Communication from North Dakota State University. We'll leave the date out. And she was recently given, although you're so young, and she was recently given the 2023 Horizon Award, which honors NDSU graduates doing outstanding work in community service. Congratulations on that. She certainly keeps herself busy. She testified earlier this morning at the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we're grateful to have you here today. Jennifer Verleger is testifying before this committee today as chair of the Western States Water Council. However, she is also a North Dakota Assistant Attorney General and provides general counsel and litigation services to the North Dakota Department of Water Resources and State Water Commission. A lot of work. Ms. Verleger has represented the state on water issues in the United States Supreme Court, federal appellate courts, North Dakota Supreme Court, state and federal district courts, and Office of Administrative Hearings in several areas, including interstate rivers, federalism, water rights, water appropriation, drainage, and sovereign lands. It's hard to imagine a more important, frankly, legal job than that one. Ms. Verleger sits on the National Water Supply Alliance Board and is a member of the Conference of Western Attorneys General. She's been an excellent resource to me and my staff. They talk about you a lot, Jennifer, and as we've worked through water supply and water law conflicts with the Corps. Thank you both, Andrea and Jennifer, for being here today. I value this opportunity to gather input from all of you and your insights, and look forward to a meaningful discussion on water management in our Western states and other issues pertaining to the Corps. Okay, so I should have read slower. Maybe the chairman could have gotten here, but we'll proceed without him, and he'll catch up. And we're going to start with witness statements. You'll each have a 5-minute statement, roughly, and you can see the lights, I'm sure, on your right in front of you there. It's just like driving. You know what red means, you know what yellow means, you know what green means. We're going to start with Ms. Plummer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Kramer, to Chairman Kelly and other members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to testify today. I'm Christy Plummer, Chief Conservation Officer of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, coalition of 63 hunting, fishing, outdoor recreation, landowner, and scientific associations that was founded in 2002. At the TRCP, we are dedicated to ensuring the places Americans love to hunt and fish are conserved, and the species upon which we depend as hunters and anglers are managed at sustainable levels. Water conservation and federal and state authorities related to water quantity and quality are therefore core to our mission, and we work closely with federal, state, tribal, and regional partners to accelerate the pace and scale of aquatic restoration. As a part of this effort, we host working groups through the TRCP Policy Council that bring together our organizational partners to develop, respond to, and advance water and natural infrastructure policy. And we engage with Congress on the biennial Water Resources Development Act and with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to implement aquatic restoration programs and authorities. Today, I will touch on the growing water management challenges, particularly in the West, and the opportunity for the Corps and this committee to advance nature-based solutions. The Corps plays an important but often overlooked role in the West, providing water to meet the needs of around 101 million people and supporting agricultural irrigation from 24 projects. Corps-owned facilities also provide abundant hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation opportunities in the West and across the country. drought and wildfire, aging infrastructure, and increasing levels of water demand, along with climate change, are growing challenges for the Corps. Addressing these challenges, we believe, will require the rapid deployment of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure, such as restoring wetlands and improving watershed health. The Corps has several existing tools and authorities at their disposal to scale natural infrastructure investments. One example is the Sustainable Rivers Program, a partnership with the Nature Conservancy that funds local efforts to integrate environmental flow and natural infrastructure objectives into existing Corps operations. In southern Arizona, this program supports a partnership to design releases from the Alamo Dam on the Bill Williams River to enhance riparian areas and reduce flood risk. Another example is the Continuing Authorities Program, and specifically the Section 206 Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Authority, which provides a streamlined process for the Corps to design and implement natural infrastructure projects. The Water Resource Development Act of 2022 includes new authorities and direction for the Corps to address drought, with provisions on managed aquifer recharge, updating water control manuals in response to drought, and facilitating dialogue on Western water management. We specifically appreciate Section 8208 of WRDA 22, which directs the Corps to assess opportunities to use natural infrastructure to reduce drought and wildfire risks to core infrastructure in the Southwest United States. This study will provide information on how natural infrastructure may be integrated into existing agency risk management and operational guidance. We encourage Congress to fully fund this study. Looking ahead, this Congress has numerous opportunities to continue to build on existing programs and authorities to tackle drought. First, Congress should invest in the existing drought resilience programs to meet the outsized demand in the West, including the Sustainable Rivers Program, the Continuing Authorities Program authorities, and WRDA 22 drought-focused provisions. Second, Congress should strengthen technical assistance. The Silver Jackets program is one successful model for flood risk management and should be expanded to address drought. Third, Congress should encourage the Corps to enhance cross-boundary partnerships with federal land management agencies and non-federal partners. Fourth, Congress should consider directing the Corps to update their benefit cost analysis process to account for the multiple benefits of natural and nature-based infrastructure. And finally, on the topic of hunting and fishing access, Congress should enable the Corps to invest in recreational infrastructure through the Bipartisan Lakes Act, spearheaded by Senator Kramer, thank you, and Senators Heinrich and Padilla. In closing, we stand ready to work with the subcommittee and full committee, Congress and the Corps to advance these fish and wildlife-focused solutions. Once again, thank you, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Kramer, for holding this important hearing today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer. Ms. Myers.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, and good afternoon, Ranking Member Kramer. I'm Leslie Myers, Associate General Manager for Water Resources at the Salt River Project. Thank you for inviting me today and to provide testimony on how we can improve our ability to respond to water management challenges using existing and potential new authorities. It's a privilege to share my insight and observations with you. SRP has been serving Arizona since 1903, almost 10 years before Arizona became the 48th state. We're the third largest not-for-profit, community-based public power entity in the country, providing sustainable, reliable, and affordable electricity to nearly 3 million people. SRP is also the largest supplier of raw water in the Phoenix metropolitan area, delivering about 800,000 acre-feet annually from the Salt and Verde rivers to municipal, industrial, and agricultural customers. SRP manages and operates 7 dams and reservoirs that can store approximately 2.3 million acre-feet of water, as well as 1,300 miles of canals, laterals, ditches, and pipelines. Roosevelt Dam was authorized as one of the first projects in the 1902 Reclamation Act. In 1905, Reclamation began construction on Roosevelt Dam, 40 miles northeast of Phoenix, which it completed in 1911. SRP has operated and managed the dam for over 100 years. The U.S. constructed Roosevelt Dam as a water storage and power generation facility, and it remains a critical source of stored water and hydroelectric power generation today. Reclamation undertook several significant modifications to the dam in the 1990s, raising it 77 feet in elevation, adding 550,000 acre-feet of dedicated flood control space, 1.2 million acre-feet of safety of dams surcharge capacity, and increasing water conservation storage capacity by about 280,000 acre-feet. The flood control space is under the jurisdiction of the Corps of Engineers under Section 7 of the Flood Control Act of 1944. The Corps of Engineers, Reclamation, and SRP developed a flood control plan in 1997 that requires that SRP evacuate water within 20 days of it first entering the flood control space. While the flood control manual ensures that SRP can operate the dam safely under the most extreme flood events, it also requires SRP to evacuate water during small and moderate flood events, something we're working with the Corps of Engineers and Reclamation to revise. In 2006 and 2020 Water Resources Development Acts included provisions authorizing the Corps of Engineers to accept funds from non-federal entities to review flood operating plans at reclamation facilities with dedicated flood control space like Roosevelt Dam. Since Congress enacted these provisions, SRP, along with 14 tribal, agricultural, industrial, and municipal partners, were funding a coordinated effort with the Corps and Reclamation to review the flood control plan. This review resulted in our proposal to temporarily extend the release period in the bottom 20% of the flood control space from 20 to 120 days in certain years. Engineers from both the Corps of Engineers and Reclamation concluded that the proposal was safe or risk neutral. This type of cross-sectional public-private partnerships is a great example of what it will take to maintain resilient water supplies in the future. The federal and non-federal partners work together to improve water management while maintaining the safety and integrity of our critical dam infrastructure. If approved, this proposal could make up to 109,000 acre-feet of floodwater annually available for use in 3 of the next 5 years. Put into perspective, this amount of water can support the annual needs of roughly 330,000 households in the Phoenix metropolitan area. The Salt and Verde rivers are highly variable river systems, and we anticipate that the changing climate will produce increasingly variable annual flows. Projections predict a hotter, drier climate that's higher variability in river flows, including wetter wet periods and sharper, deeper drought periods. The Salt and Verde River systems experienced significant runoff this season, and water rose 6 feet into the flood control space. If the proposed changes to the flood control plan were in place, SRP would have been able to reduce the flood releases by 109,000 acre-feet. Thank you, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Kramer, for this opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Governor Lewis.
Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Kramer, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Gila River Indian community. The subcommittee's focus on the role of the Corps of Engineers highlights the need for an efficient all-of-government approach to the drought crisis on the Colorado River. Now, the Corps is a key partner in addressing water management, conservation, and infrastructure related to drought, and is already engaged in new infrastructure investments, operational improvements at existing facilities, ecosystem resilience, and planning assistance. The Corps has also taken positive steps to ensure that tribal governments, especially those tribes with significant water supplies, are at the table as strategic governmental partners. Now, I do want to acknowledge that the relationship between the Corps and tribal nations has not always been a positive one. Historically, decisions around flood control, pipelines, and other projects have at times pitted the Corps against tribal governments. But there is an important role for the Corps to play in drought mitigation, and we've been encouraged by the more recent focus of the Corps through its current leadership and tribal partnership program to look for ways, innovative ways, to partner with tribes and to support those innovative projects that bring long-term solutions to the ongoing drought crisis that we find ourselves in. In November of 2022, the Corps issued new interim tribal partnership guidelines and guidance to expand the types of partnerships through which the Corps can engage with tribal governments. A critical component of the revised guidance is a stated commitment to tribal sovereignty and an acknowledgement of tribal capacity that, in many cases, either meets or exceeds the capacity of the Corps to carry out projects on tribal lands. Following this guidance, the community sought to partner with the Corps on a project that was already well underway when the guidance was issued, a pilot project to install solar panels over a stretch of one of the community's irrigation canals. Now, the community's concept is that solar over canals would generate renewable energy for operating our system and reduce water evaporation. Now, this concept has been considered but never tested in the United States. Now, using the community's own resources, we commissioned a study that showed that our design would indeed increase system efficiency, conserve water, and generate energy. Although phase one of the pilot project will only cover about 1,000 feet of canal, our study shows real potential for this concept. Now, to give you an idea of how significant this technology might be, there are approximately 150 miles of canals through the reservation that would be suitable for this installation. If fully developed, we could generate over 750 megawatts of power and conserve over 6,000 acre-feet of water from evaporation loss each year. Now, this project will have long-lasting water conservation impacts and will serve as a model that can be used by other tribes and local governments. And this type of project innovation that Congress intended when you included $25 million for similar pilot projects for solar over canal in the Inflation Reduction Act. But when you are the first to bring a new concept to a large bureaucratic agency such as the Corps, the process can be cumbersome. And unfortunately, current Corps policy required that the Corps do its own validation study, which essentially duplicated the work that we've already done to study the project and its potential and slowed the project down. The Corps timeline for construction is also much slower than ours, and their project budget exceeds what the cost would have been if the Corps could contract directly from the community to complete the work under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. And although the project could already be well underway and heading toward completion, the Corps' inability to contract directly with tribes has slowed the process. Exactly what you don't need when you are responding to the drought crisis that we're all facing. And while there have been some issues and delay, I want to state that I do think the Corps is moving in the right direction under Assistant Secretary Connor's leadership. In the past few days, we've had major movement from the Corps on our project. Now, the Corps' validation study was approved late last week, and the conclusions match those of the community's validation study. Both the community and the Corps are confident that we will be signing an historic project partnership agreement for construction of the solar over canal project within the next 3 weeks. Now, based on the community's experience, my one recommendation for the committee, along with the need for continued and expanded funding for the Corps' Tribal Partnership Program, would be to consider statutory language to allow for tribal self-determination programs to be implemented at the Corps, because the drought crisis and other complex infrastructure issues can't be solved without tribal governments being at the table as true partners. Senators, thank you, Senator Kelly, for inviting the Gila River Indian community to participate in this hearing and for your leadership within the state and the basin and drought issues.
Thank you, Governor Lewis. Ms. Travnicek.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Kramer, and members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation to testify today on the importance of jointly managed water infrastructure in the state of North Dakota. My name is Andrea Travnicek, and I am the Director of the North Dakota Department of Water Resources. The Department of Water Resources has trust responsibilities for managing and developing North Dakota's waters, and we strive to sustainably manage and develop North Dakota's water resources for the health, safety, and prosperity of its people, businesses, agriculture, energy, industry, recreation, and natural resources. We know that sound infrastructure must be maintained and modernized to meet multiple objectives. The Garrison Dam, completed in 1956, forms Lake Sakakawea and was authorized by the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1935 and the Flood Control Act of 1944. The dam is part of a project planning effort known as the Garrison Diversion Unit, authorized by Congress in 1965. The Garrison Diversion Unit, associated with the Bureau of Reclamation, diverts water from Lake Sakakawea to provide water for irrigation and water supply. As part of the PIC-Sloan Plan, irrigation over 1 million acres and other water development opportunities in central and eastern North Dakota were authorized by the federal government. The Snake Creek Embankment impounds Lake Audubon, a sub-impoundment of Lake Sakakawea. Lake Audubon's elevation is cooperatively managed by Reclamation, the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by pumping water from Lake Sakakawea across the embankment into Lake Audubon, where it is then diverted eastward for its federally authorized uses through the McCluskey Canal. The embankment is authorized to provide relocation routes for a highway, railroad, and utilities inundated by the creation of Lake Sakakawea, and to serve as a sub-impoundment dam for the diversion of Missouri River water to eastern North Dakota as part of the Garrison Diversion Unit. The diverted water is then used to support the state's largest industry, agriculture, by providing water to the McCluskey Canal. The diverted water also supports municipal, rural, industrial water supplies, fish and wildlife, recreation, and other project purposes in accordance with federal reclamation laws. The embankment's original design included relief wells specifically designed to maintain structural integrity during a high water differential, ensuring obligations for water and recreational users on Lake Audubon are met even during drought. In 2007, a post-drought seepage analysis determined there is a potential for adverse underseepage that could lead to embankment failure when pool differentials exceed 43 feet between Lake Sakakawea and Audubon, right? We got that. And further identified performance issues due to a lack of relief well maintenance. In 2019, the Embankment Interim Risk Reduction Measures project identified a selected alternative to modify the water control manual to incorporate an operating restriction that limits the pool differential between Lake Sakakawea and Audubon to 43 feet during times of extreme drought. This means a partial drawdown of Lake Audubon could occur, which could impact regional water supply projects and irrigation, especially during times of drought when supply is most needed. In response to concerns, Senator Kramer included a provision in the 2020 Water Resource Development Act directing the Corps to reevaluate structural and operational alternatives to reduce the risk of an embankment failure, coordinate on the alternatives with the state and local entities whose water obligations would be impacted by a drawdown, and to properly account for the economic benefits provided by the embankment. In 2021, the Corps initiated a dam safety modification report for the embankment to identify and recommend a risk management plan. The recommended plan is an operational alternative to remodify the 2019 Water Control Manual to include risk-informed language, update the dam monitoring and surveillance plan, and remove the formal reference to the 43-foot differential constraint. While removing the differential is progress, the Corps is not addressing the overall concern of the project not meeting all authorized purposes that are associated with the Embankment Lake Audubon project. The draft report and recommended plan are only based on the perspective of potential dam failure that could result in a low potential loss of life rather than the breadth of economic and ecosystem impacts associated with the entire Garrison Diversion Unit and Embankment Lake Audubon project. The other authorized purposes associated with the project are not fully credited in this study and are therefore minimized when determining the recommended plan and the final benefit-cost ratio. The lack of consideration for the other authorized purposes and the low benefit-cost ratio developed as a result of diminishing the value of these services have led to a decision by the Corps to have an operational fix versus a sound structural fix. This decision leaves current and future projects in jeopardy. Sound, reliable infrastructure is a top priority for the state and local project sponsors. As of May 2023, federal, state, and local partners have already committed over $500 million to projects dependent on the embankment stability to put Missouri River system water to beneficial use. It is imperative that the Corps look at water management from a holistic approach, especially as it relates to all project purposes and directives that have been authorized by Congress. Furthermore, state and local investments and dependence on reliable water sources that may be impacted by a compromised embankment must be fully considered for the citizens of our state who are looking to the federal government to keep the promises that have been made.
Thank you, Ms. Travnicek. Ms. Verleger.
Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Kramer, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing and your efforts to achieve a balance between federal policies and programs and the role of states in our federalist system. My name is Jennifer Verleger. I'm here today as the chair of the Western States Water Council. I'm also an Assistant Attorney General for the state of North Dakota, where I represent the State Water Commission, Department of Water Resources, Dr. Travnicek. In that capacity, I'm also a delegate to the Conference of Western Attorney General. Additionally, I sit on the board of the National Water Supply Alliance, which focuses on core water supply issues. Over the decades, Western states and the Corps of Engineers have butted heads when state water law has conflicted with federal programs and priorities, particularly when it comes to water supply. This problem can be illustrated with an analogy. Think of a typical kitchen sink. There are usually two sides to the sink with a divider in the center and a faucet that swings between each side. On one side, the drain is plugged. This is the core's storage reservoir. On the other side, there is no plug, which is the flowing river. The running faucet is the upstream river and the surface runoff, which is controlled by Mother Nature. The core controls which side of the sink the faucet is running into by opening and closing the outflow of its reservoirs. Once the plug side of the sink is full, the core must drain some of the water or move the faucet to the uncontrolled free-flowing side. The core takes the position that all of the water in the sink is in storage and subject to their control and the fees that they charge. The states take the position that the sink is in their own house and that even though the core gets to control which side of the sink is filling, it only gets to enter into a water supply agreement or charge users when they take water from the plug side of the sink. Water that is coming out of the faucet before it gets to the sink, for example, when you fill a glass, and water that flows into the open portion of the sink is the state's to appropriate. After several years of the state's unsuccessful attempts to resolve their differences with the Corps over this issue, a provision was included in WRDA 2014 prohibiting the Corps from charging surplus water fees in the upper Missouri River Basin for 10 years. However, undeterred, in 2016, the Corps published its proposed water supply rule. The states had several issues with the proposed rule. First, despite the Corps' insistence that it sells storage, the rule never defined that term. As a result, the Corps continues to assert that all of the water in the reservoir is its to manage. In other words, the entire kitchen sink. In the rule, the Corps specifically stated that it was aware of North Dakota and other states' positions that, quote, users should not be required to pay for benefits they do not receive. But stated that the law, quote, does not require the Corps to undertake such an analysis. Not only did the proposed rule require states to pay for benefits they do not receive, it usurped the states' rights and authority to control and allocate their own water resources. It ignored multiple declarations from Congress that states have the primary responsibility for water management. Congress and the courts have unequivocally established and repeatedly affirmed the doctrine of cooperative federalism regarding water management issues. There was bipartisan opposition to the proposed rule from the Western States Water Council, Conference of Western Attorneys General, and Western Governors Association. There was bipartisan opposition to the rule from 19 senators, including Senators Kramer and Merkley. Ultimately, the proposed water supply rule was withdrawn in 2020. Most recently, Senator Kramer successfully incorporated into WRDA 2022 a permanent ban on the Corps charging surplus water fees on water from the upper Missouri River Basin. While this resolves the issue for some states regarding fees, it still leaves the fee issue open for other states, as well as leaving unresolved for all states the issue regarding control over the water allocation. As such, WRDA 2022 established the Western States Cooperative Committee, which requires the Corps to annually meet with delegates from the Western states to develop and make recommendations to avoid or minimize conflicts between Corps projects and water rights and water laws of the Western states. The committee must provide a report to Congress. The Western States Water Council and the Conference of Western Attorneys General are working diligently with their memberships to make their committee appointments. And in fact, I believe we have sent a letter that went out yesterday making some of those appointments. While there is no expectation the committee will be the end-all solution to states' conflicts with the Corps, there is the hope that with this additional congressional oversight, the Corps will take the cooperative portion of its cooperative federalism responsibilities more seriously. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Verleger. I'm going to start and recognize myself for 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Senator Kramer. And with the four of us here, if it just remains that, I think we'll get a couple opportunities. I want to start with Governor Lewis. Thank you for your opening statement, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about, which is aligning of these canals. Some of the stuff you went through pretty quickly, so I want to kind of drill down. But first, let me say thank you for everything the Gila River Indian community is doing in trying to just mitigate for this horrific drought we've been experiencing for 20 years. And it really is going to take it's going to take all of us. And the community stepping up in the way you have is much appreciated by the state of Arizona and myself and my office. You know, the advantage we get from this is we're going to save some water, and we're also going to generate some electricity. And you went through some of this already, but I want to make sure we get this correct for the record. So it's going to be, my understanding is initially 1,000 feet, lineal feet of solar panels covering these canals. And for that 1,000 feet, what is the anticipated water savings per year in acre feet?
Thank you, Chairman. The community expects that the project will conserve water, of course, that is lost to evaporation and thermoelectric energy usage. So it's expected to conserve roughly 8 acre-feet of water annually. So that is combined of 5.4 from evaporation and 2.58 acre-feet from thermoelectric energy usage.
And how many total megawatts would that lining of the 1,000 lineal feet of canal generate?
The total megawatts, as I go back to my...
1,000 feet will produce a megawatt.
So 1,000, it would equate to 1,000 feet would produce 1 megawatt of energy, Senator.
1 megawatt of energy. And what's the total cost of the project? And what's the federal versus non-federal? And can you go into a little bit more detail about why, I think in your opening statement you said, if the Army Corps was to do this on their own, it would take longer and cost more. And could you give us an estimate of how much more it would cost?
Right, thank you. So the traditional cost share percentage, Chairman, is a 65% to 35% breakdown, and that's for agricultural water supply, and of course in accordance with 33 USC subsection 2213C. This would include credits for LERDs, of course stands for lands, easements, rights-of-way, relocations, and disposal. However, associated implementation guidance modifies the cost-sharing agreement for tribes by applying a waiver of $665,000 to the non-federal share. So this will reduce, Chairman, the community's cost share to 25% of the regular 35% share. So this reduction results in an estimated non-federal cost share of roughly around 6% of the estimated total project cost of $423,850. So the adjusted federal costs are around $6,320,000.
And what's the opportunity? So how many miles of canals did you say there were?
That's suitable for this project, 150 miles.
150 miles, so 6,000 feet or so in a mile. That's, you could, expand this by, well over a couple orders of magnitude, potentially. And obviously, the cost would be in proportion. But my point is, I think there's an opportunity to save significant amounts of water and generate significant electricity.
Yeah, Chairman, and this is a goal that, as a tribal leader, I set for our community to be one of the first net zero communities, especially in Arizona, and potentially to be a significant energy producer as well through this project. So we might be in competition with my good friend to the right of me from the Salt River Project. So.
And what was you said there was a recommendation of a change to statutory language. I'm going to go over here by about 30 seconds. If you could go over that again and maybe be a little bit more specific. Right.
So, so we're realizing that the Corps lacks that, Senator, Chairman, that essential statutory authority to treat tribes as respected sovereign partners. So we're looking at, and we're respectfully looking for Congress the potential to significantly enhance the Corps' ability to execute the TPP, Chairman, by granting the agency the ability to enter into those self-governance contracts with tribes, thereby respecting tribes' inherent sovereign nature.
Thank you, Governor Lewis. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman. And for all of you, I'm quite certain that there's going to be plenty of demand for both projects. There's going to be more demand than there is electricity, so keep them all going as long as you can. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Verleger. But by the way, but all of you are great. It was really fascinating to listen, at least for nerds like us. It's fascinating to listen to all of your stories and anecdotes. But Ms. Verleger, your insight's been really helpful to my team, as I mentioned earlier, and I thank you for that. And I see why you're so valuable to them. You provided some really instructive background, and I love the illustration of the sink and the two sides. But with regard to that water supply rule, from a legal standpoint, and again, you talked about Congress and the courts a little bit, but maybe dig down just a little bit more for me on the legal objections to the supply rule in the first place, because I think history is instructive. I'm glad we got it withdrawn. I'd love to make it permanent for everybody, ultimately, but maybe give a little legal analysis as why it was so objectionable.
Thank you for the question. So basically, by the Corps trying to usurp control over all of that water and, the entire kitchen sink, that takes away the state's ability to allocate the water in accordance with their state laws. So every state allocates their laws or allocates their water somewhat differently. Arizona's a little bit different than North Dakota, but generally we all use the prior appropriation system in the West. And so there are already mechanisms set up in place to allocate water between users, especially in times of shortage. And when the Corps comes in and tries to, take control over the whole sink, that really takes away the state's ability to do any sort of regulation, and that is contrary to state law.
Maybe even the Constitution.
And the Constitution.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the Western Water Cooperative Committee, which again, the Corps wasn't crazy about us doing. I mean, their sense was that we can work with attorneys generals and we can work with governors in individual states. But tell me how you see the new committee working and why it might work better in getting better cooperation with the Corps.
I see it working so the committee appoints, there's one person appointed by the governor and one person appointed by the attorney general from each of the states, and those are supposed to be people who actually have technical expertise. These aren't meant to be political appointments, but people who are actually going to be able to dig down into the weeds with the Corps of Engineers staffers and discuss the problems and kind of try to find solutions. And also they are required to report to Congress every year after we have the meeting about whatever it is that the committee talks about. So, I expect it to be focused a lot on water supply issues, but there's no language in the bill that says it has to focus on water supply issues. So I think we can maybe broaden out from that and, see where there's conflict.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to being in the middle of that, quite honestly. So thank you for your work on that. Okay, Dr. Travnicek. Thanks for your work on the Snake Creek embankment and for understanding my illustration. Dig down a little bit more for me on what an EA should include in terms of information. Now, fortunately, the General Spellman's lifted the time, provided more time for comment. It's kind of fun. I mean, this is how it works in North Dakota. I text the governor calls Andrea, and pretty soon we're getting them more information. And fortunately, what they ignored the first go-around, they're now asking for in the second go-around. Tell us a little bit about that additional information that is, by the way, in their charter, right?
Right. So, Senator Kramer, thank you for that question. Yeah, as we're looking at the Snake Creek embankment and the economic analysis that goes with it, right now the Corps is looking at the economic analysis just from the dam safety perspective, so the loss of life. But I had mentioned in the testimony that there's multiple purposes associated with this embankment. So, looking at it from that water supply perspective, recreation, fish and wildlife perspective, and that's why we had the concerns. That's why we reached out to you and the governor's office looking for that extension. So we had requested seeing the data that was associated with the economic analysis and what that looked like. And we did have to sign an NDA associated with the extra information, but my team was able to dive in, working with Garrison Diversion Conservancy District as well, what those numbers are. And we feel that if there was an opportunity to make sure that we're looking at this from a multiple purpose perspective versus just the dam safety, loss of life perspective, that we would be above that 1.0 that's needed for the benefit cost ratio to move forward with a structural fix versus an operational fix.
Thanks for that. I think in the next round, I may come back to that and even drill down a little more on things like lost economic opportunity if you don't have the water. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Padilla.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing as you and I together, the senators representing California and Arizona during a 1,200-year mega drought. We know all too well that the federal response to drought and water management requires a whole-of-government approach based on science and data. Governor Lewis, I particularly want to thank you for being here today, and thank you for your work on behalf of the Gila River Indian community to elevate tribal voices within the Colorado River discussion, and for being so proactive in finding solutions to the crisis. Look forward to working together to ensure the sustainability of the Colorado River for many generations to come. Now, in California, the Army Corps works closely with state and local agencies to improve, among other things, the forecasting of atmospheric rivers, which are often described as rivers in the sky, rivers that can carry as much water as 15 Mississippi rivers. And they produce most of the rain and snow that the West depends upon each and every year. The research conducted through the Forecast-Informed Reservoir Operations Program by the Corps in partnership with state and local agencies has enabled water managers to retain water that would otherwise be needlessly released, resulting not just cost savings, but more importantly, a more reliable water supply, while also preventing and enhancing flood control capabilities. My first question is for Ms. Verleger. As you stated in your testimony, Western states experience great variability in precipitation, which has serious impacts and consequences for the management of water projects. How critical is FERO for effectively managing drought and flood operations across the West?
Thank you for the question, and I would say it is very critical for states in the West. I understand that NOAA has submitted a report to Congress recommending a pilot project for improving the Western S2S, which is subseasonal to seasonal forecasting, to support water management. And the council would recommend that the Corps should enter into an agreement with NOAA to partner on that project and tailor it to ensure that it supports the FERO, Forecast-Informed Reservoir Operations.
Thank you for that. I'm looking forward to following up with you on those items. Now, in addition, there's a strong and growing interest across not just California, but beyond, in understanding the broad benefits of flood-managed aquifer recharge, or FloodMAR projects. FloodMAR projects use floodwater from rainfall or snowmelt for managed aquifer recharge on agricultural lands and working landscapes, including refuges and floodplains. FloodMAR projects demonstrate how natural infrastructure can mitigate flood impacts, maximize water retention, and provide habitat benefits for fish and wildlife. Questions for you, Ms. Plummer. Can you speak to how water conservation and drought provisions included in the 2022 WRDA will help stakeholders across the West implement watershed-scale multi-benefit projects to mitigate climate impacts?
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for that question. Exactly in line with the testimony we provided. Tremendous built-up authorities over multiple WRDAs in support of these levels of projects. And we're strongly supportive of the vast range of authorities across the continuing authorities program, such as Section 206, I mentioned in my testimony, aquatic ecosystem restoration, to provide the tools for non-federal partners to do things like wet meadow restoration, floodplain restoration, and really look at these abilities for natural features that exist in the landscapes today to be restored and do more long-term water storage, water conservation that takes some of these fluctuations out of the water that we're seeing right now of the vast changes that are happening between atmospheric conditions such as facing California and these mass flooding events that are happening. So really holding, storing, and slowing the water over longer periods of time and really tapping into the large expanse of authorities that the Corps and this committee and other efforts that of Congress have really pushed the Corps on to really think about these, again, natural features, nature-based solutions to do these types of conservation objectives for our systems in the West.
Thank you. And with the few seconds I have left, I'm going to squeeze in one more question here, but I won't stick around for a second round. Follow-up, Ms. Plummer. As we speak, the Corps is managing the flows of 4 reservoirs to minimize flood risk by low-lying Central Valley communities in California facing potentially catastrophic spring snowmelt. How can managed aquifer recharge near Corps facilities, such as those in California, help mitigate flood risk for these types of communities?
Thank you again, Senator. You know, I think it's really very much about slowing the water down and storing it over and utilizing the features we have on the landscape to store that water for future use. So, you know, thinking about geologic storage combined with things like, again, wet meadow storage. Also, we're very focused on ensuring that wildfire resilience and our forest systems are able to store the water and snow melt, and that, again, there's a slower pace in terms of hitting the reservoirs. And sedimentation for our interests in terms of recreation and how sedimentation impacts reservoirs and the health of hunting and fishing on our systems is another area of focus. And so putting in these natural features blended with the structural features is a win-win in terms of reservoir health and storage.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ricketts.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you very much for holding this, Ranking Member Kramer as well, for this important talk about water resources. It's something that's certainly very important in Nebraska. And Nebraska has a long history of managing our water in a responsible way. In fact, the Doherty Water for Food Institute has looked at our farmers' productivity, crop water productivity, which is how much water basically they're using to be able to grow corn and soybeans. And from 1990 to 2014, it's increased by 75%, which means we're being more productive, growing more crops with less water. And Nebraska has had a system of water management in place through 20 local natural resource districts for over 50 years that has helped us manage our Ogallala aquifer to keep it within 1 foot of where it was in the 1950s, where states like Colorado have drained their aquifer down, the Ogallala aquifer down by nearly 14 feet. And so we've worked with surrounding states like Wyoming to create compacts, Kansas. And in fact, we've got a compact with Colorado that goes back 100 years that entitles us to water on the South Platte River, which comes from the Rockies through Colorado into Nebraska. And actually, in years like the past couple of years, we've had drought. I was at one point on the South Platte River, I saw there was no water coming across that, even though Colorado is supposed to be giving us 120 cubic feet a second during the summer. And we can get even more in the non-irrigation season if we have built a canal, which we are undertaking to do. In fact, that compact from 100 years ago gives us the ability to build a canal in Colorado to Nebraska to a reservoir system. And just we started the funding with it when I was governor, and this year the legislature has increased that significantly, backing that project so that we can continue to make sure we get the water for our state, because that's going to impact drinking water all the way to Lincoln and Omaha as well. So, come on, we're talking about water. We're going to talk about Nebraska. Come on, I know it's all about you, Senator Kramer, but North Dakota. But I am going to get there. So, anyways, Ms. Travnicek, you talked about the Army Corps, and I think it was the Snake Creek embankment and the uncertainty that they were creating by not appropriately looking at the types of ROI. What can Congress do, or this committee do, to make sure that we are properly enforcing the Water Resources Development Act? Is there more things that we can be doing to be proactive here in this committee or in Congress?
Senator, thank you for the questions. I think what would be beneficial is just making sure that it's fully clarified. I mean, clearly with the last Water Resource Development Act for 2022, there was discussion that Senator Kramer included related to the economic analysis. But they decided to take it at a smaller lens, just looking at one authority versus the multiple authorities. So I think trying to figure out what the appropriate authorization is, and can that be expanded to the multiple purposes. So I think that's where that would be helpful, just to make that really crystal clear. If we've got these projects that have multiple purposes, why are we not looking at it as a whole?
Mm-hmm. And what's kind of been your response in working with the Army Corps of Engineers? What have they been saying?
Senator, so the last discussion we had last week in regards to the economic analysis, where they really did just focus on the one element, the dam safety, loss of life, for the economic analysis. And that's where we as a state continue to impress upon looking at all the other authorized purposes that are associated with it, especially the water quantity side of things.
So they haven't acknowledged yet the other purposes yet? They've only still acknowledged the one?
So, Senator, they talk about the multiple purposes, but they don't include it in the economic analysis.
And what do we need to do then in order to be able to make sure that they're recognizing those other purposes?
So, Senator, I think making it very crystal clear if they can make sure that they're looking at that multiple purposes.
So write it into the language when we update it. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. And Ms. Verleger, can you talk a little bit about Verleger, what your experience with the Army Corps of Engineers has been like when you've had your conversations with them?
Thank you for the question. I think it depends on who has been in charge and where we've been at in the process. The problems we've been having over water supply in North Dakota have dated back at least to the time I've been there, which is about 14 years. And I know that we've gone through this same round of things back in the 80s. You know, I wasn't there, but I have all the documents and history. And so a lot of the problem seems to be, you know, we talk to the staff level and they tell us, well, that's not our decision, that's a headquarters decision. And then we talk to headquarters and they kind of send us back. So there's a lot of bouncing around back and forth, trying to even get to the right person who can help us. So that has been a problem, and I'm hopeful that the Western Cooperative Committee will help solve that problem, because those are the people that are supposed to be in charge and helping us.
Do you agree with Dr. Travnicek's assessment, though, that more clarification in WRDA will be helpful to that?
I do agree with that assessment, yes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Myers, you discussed in your opening remarks the work that SRP has done with the Corps to update flood control manuals. And I want to get a little bit into that a little bit more. So across all your reservoirs at SRP, how much storage capacity do you have to keep available for flood control management? And then can you explain how the Army Corps flood control manuals impact the river operations?
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. Of our 7 reservoirs that we operate, only one has dedicated flood control space, and that's Theodore Roosevelt Dam. There's 550,000 acre-feet of space, flood control space in Theodore Roosevelt Dam, and that is operated pursuant to our water control manual with the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation.
And beyond the Army Corps telling you through these flood control curves how much storage capacity you have to have for flood control, is there anything more that affects your operations, or is it just, you know, having that number based on the existing curve?
Well, today we operate, the flood control manual dictates that we evacuate the space in Roosevelt Dam, which is the highest upstream dam on the Salt River, in 20 days. Our flood control manual does allow for temporary deviations, and we've been working with as do many other flood control manuals, we've been working with the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation to solidify that proposal, and our proposal is to use the bottom 20% of that space and extend that release period from 20 days to 120 days. And you know, in Arizona, especially for our spring runoff, which is what we had this year, some really intense spring storms, if we could extend the release period for 120 days into the summer, we could meet some really critical demand with that water supply.
How much water would that be?
About 109,000 acre-feet annually.
You mentioned that in your opening remarks. When was the last time the Army Corps did an update for one of its manuals?
So I can only speak for our manual, but I know that it's not unusual for the Corps to go for many decades if there's no substantive changes to the reservoir system and not update their manuals. Our manual was established in 1997. This is our first re-look at that.
So it's been over 25 years since that's been updated. And with that 550,000 acre-feet of available storage for flood control, meaning you could, if you need to, you could flow that amount of water and it's not going to flood. How often have you maybe exceeded that?
This year, actually, the elevation rose to about 6 feet in the flood control space. The total is 24 feet, and that's the highest elevation that we've been in the flood control space in Roosevelt Dam.
So that's 25%, essentially, if you're just thinking about linear feet.
Yes.
About 25% of what you have available for flood control you actually used, going back how far?
To the 1990s.
Since
when
the
it
1990s.
was modified. Now, there are significant, the fifth largest city in the country is just downstream of this dam, so there are significant benefits from the flood control space.
But do you feel now that you could modify that to be more favorable towards water storage as opposed to flood control?
We certainly feel that this bottom 20%, the lowest 5 feet, is a good place to start. And our proposal is to do a 5-year plan, and we can enter into flood control space up to 3 times during that. And we'll get some really good data and information from that. And if it's successful, we'll move forward with a long-term modification to the water control manual.
And was that enabled by what we did in the 2020 WRDA?
Yes, sir, it was. That did allow us, the Salt River Project, to work more closely with the Corps and the Bureau of Reclamation on the reevaluation.
And do you feel like we're moving in the right direction on this?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Senator Kramer.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And so, Dr. Travnicek, I wanted to talk a little more about the other factors that should be in an economic analysis. But your discussion with Governor Ricketts remind me that there is nothing more feared by the Corps of Engineers than a governor who becomes a senator and gets on the EPW committee. And because governors always have all of this experience and pent-up frustration that they want to take out on them. However, I thought the discussion was great because I think both Jennifer and Andrea gave the answer, but the Corps still didn't seem to be hearing our voice in the mandate. No, you have to consider these other things. However, and this is where hope lies in my view, the cooperative committee, the Western Water Cooperative Committee, where governors and attorneys general appoint these people. The reason the Corps leadership didn't want to do it is because they like talking to each governor one at a time, or each, their staff level discussions one at a time. But as a group, the West together, and strong bipartisan, as we notice in this room, while aren't identical, we have similar concerns. And that's why we created this committee that will answer both to the Corps and then to Congress, so that we will be able to be kept up to date on how they're responding, so that we can hopefully make it crystal clear, Dr. Travnicek, that they're either meeting or not meeting. Now, I'm going to be hopeful because I'm a hopeful person. I agree with several of the witnesses that say we've got, right now, pretty good leadership. I think we do at the Corps. I have great respect for General Spellman. I have great respect for Secretary Mike, I call him. Anyway, and I just think I'm going to be hopeful, okay? I think Secretary Connor, having been involved in other agencies, Interior, understanding the role of states and the federal government and natural resource management, I'm going to be hopeful. But we'll reserve the tough ones for you, Governor. But maybe, Doctor, if just expand a little bit more, because one of the things, having been an economic development director, the role of water, obviously irrigation is critical. Obviously municipal use, really a big deal. Both big economic drivers that should be considered as part of any analysis. But beyond that, there's the whole role of industrial development, and it's hard to measure what would have been possible had we had the water where we needed the water. For example, I think of all of the projects that have probably gone by the wayside because we didn't have adequate water. Can that be part of the analysis? I want to have integrity, but can that be part of it if you can document projects that are either in the docket or in the queue or lost opportunities if there was just a better supply?
Senator,
Thanks for the question. That would be our hope, right? So we're hopeful as well, some of the discussions related to that, knowing that the water supply projects that we've been working on, knowing that we've had authorization from 1965 in order to use the McCluskey Canal, in order to get water out east to the Fargo region, to the Grand Forks region. So trying to get water out east is for 50% of the population in North Dakota. So we've been trying to move forward with those projects. So it's been in the works a long time, so we hope that they would take that into account for the economic analysis.
Yeah. Well, great. Anything you'd add to that, Jennifer, in terms of are we hopeful about the leadership of the Corps right now and that they're maybe going to listen a little better?
Yes, Senator, I'm always hopeful that leadership at the Corps will be helpful to us, and I would echo your comments about General Spellman. He's been very good to work with, been helpful in listening to the state's prerogative.
Well, and my observation, and of course, again, I looked at Governor Ricketts because he's got so much experience with the Omaha office. I mean, I think over the generations of leadership, we can always get along with Omaha. It's when it gets to, Oregon or Washington, it gets more complicated. So, all right, that's enough from me. I'm grateful to all of you. I think your testimony's been great, and I love ending on a note of optimism.
I'll recognize Governor Ricketts.
Senator now, but I would agree with Senator Kramer's statement about when you've got a little bit of knowledge about it from personal experience, it certainly gives you a background in it. And that's actually one of the areas I want to hit upon. And I will say that in the last few months, we've seen a big change in the Corps in Nebraska with regard to more timely responses to getting things done. So I do think, to echo your point about some of the leadership there is maybe getting a little bit more responsive. But I can tell you, for example, in the past, we had a permit that took 6 years to issue that was for just raising the levees around Offutt Air Force Base. And because the Corps did not give it that permit in a timely manner, we had floods in 2019 that did $1 billion in damage. It cost the taxpayers $1 billion because they were not timely in that. And one of the challenges I think we have, and Dr. Travnicek, you referenced the Flood Control Act of 1944, where it directs the Corps to protect against flooding, protecting life and property. And of course, one of the other functions of the Corps is navigation. But there was also a court case in Minnesota, it's my recollection, that directed the Corps to also take into account the Endangered Species Act. And I think this is an area where we in Congress have to be thinking about how we may be hampering the Corps in its mission because of that court case. Congress has never dedicated which of those is a priority: flood control, navigation, or endangered species. And so the Corps has to juggle all those without direction from Congress. And so that's an opportunity for perhaps this committee to think about. But in your experience in North Dakota, can you think of projects that were delayed because of the Corps having to juggle flood control, navigation, and endangered species?
Senator, as we look at those type of projects, and we do have the authorized purposes associated with the main stem dam, Lake Sakakawea within North Dakota, that has all those different purposes, so fish and wildlife, navigation, flood control. And we've been able to, in working with the Corps, they're the ones that operate that system. But as we look at that other projects that could be delayed for permits, for instance, for Northwest Area Water Supply, in regards to getting a 408 permit in order to move forward with that project, that's taken over 2 years to get the permit that's needed. So it just kind of depends on the situation, on the project, definitely recognizing that they do have a lot of authorized purposes that they have to be looking at, but also just trying to make sure that we're not delaying things in the process.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Verleger, can you talk about, do you have any experience with regard to, again, the Corps and having to juggle flood control, navigation, and endangered species, and whether there's been any projects you can think of that were delayed because of that?
Thank you for the question. I can't think of a specific project, but we have had in North Dakota some issues with the Corps, disagreement, I would say, over endangered species, the Endangered Species Act, and the Corps. The Corps has a responsibility to meet the Endangered Species Act and those provisions, and we do, of course, have threatened and endangered species on the Missouri River. And so there is some disagreement about just how much control that gives the Corps over certain activities that they can do, projects, how they operate things. And so I think there's some disagreement there because I think the Endangered Species Act is somewhat used to, further whatever purpose it is that the Corps is trying to further without looking at the holistic picture.
Yeah, and I think some of the experience I had as governor in Nebraska was that, again, without that clear direction from Congress with regard to what is the priority, you're really kind of left up to the judgment of the Corps, and they've got multiple masters to serve here, so it's, in fairness, difficult for them, but then also can drive projects, at least I've seen along the Missouri River, along the Nebraska-Iowa border, where it's driving projects that then lead to additional flooding. And that's one of the things that I think, again, this committee and this Congress can do is maybe look at how we can prioritize that to prioritize protecting people and property overall. So I don't know if you would have any further comment on that, either one of you? No? All right, great. Then I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Plummer, I'm going to have some questions for you just for the record, where we have to go to a all senators briefing. So just want to thank all of our witnesses for being here and sharing your perspective on what the Army Corps can be doing with their water management approach. But before we adjourn, some housekeeping for Senators Ricketts and Kramer. We can submit written questions for the record by 4 p.m. on Tuesday, May 30th, which is 2 years from today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. What did I say?